They didn't come at night. They came at noon, 3 uniforms walking up my cabin steps like they owned the mountain. After months of HOA harassment, I knew this was Valerie Grant's endgame, make me snap, drag me off, and call it justice. But something was off. The warrant read like a copy-paste, the Miranda warning skipped a line, and one officer's badge had the wrong microprint. I've done 12 years of military police, my heartbeat slowed the moment theirs sped up. Still, when unmarked SUVs fanned across my federal claim and rifles leveled at my chest, I realized this wasn't just HOA drama. Someone I trusted had turned the key from the inside. The line between training exercise and federal sting blurred, and I was standing dead center. You want to know how a petty HOA war detonated into a criminal conspiracy? Stay with me. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. When I tell people the story, most think I'm exaggerating. They imagine HOA drama as a few nasty letters, maybe fines for tall grass, or a rude neighbor banging on your door. They don't picture unmarked SUVs surrounding a federal claim or armed men reading bogus warrants. But my story didn't begin with the guns. It started with wood shavings and quiet mornings in a cabin my grandfather left me. That cabin was more than a house. It was legacy law and the one piece of ground in Colorado I could truly call mine. Grandpa secured the mining claim back in 1962 when the federal government handed out permits like poker chips if you knew the right paperwork. He knew the value wasn't just in the minerals buried deep, but in the legal fortress surrounding the claim. Federal law beat local politics every time he'd say puffing on a hand-rolled cigarette by the fireplace. Those words stuck. So when I inherited the place, I knew I wasn't just receiving timber walls and land, I was inheriting sovereignty in the eyes of the law. Enter Valerie Grant, HOA president, former real estate lawyer. Early 50s, Mercedes driver hair so precisely styled, it looked sculpted in marble. She wasn't just a woman with rules, she was a woman with an obsession. Years earlier, she'd built a beautiful deck that unfortunately stretched 3 feet onto federal land. I had stumbled on it during one of my assignments as a military police contractor working perimeter checks. I reported it because that's the law, and because if I didn't, I'd be the one in handcuffs. The feds came down on her hard $75,000 in fines, demolition orders, professional investigation. Within months, her life unraveled. Divorce ruined career-mounting debts. In Valerie's mind, I hadn't been doing my duty. I had been executing her. To her, I wasn't a neighbor with federal rights. I was the executioner who stole her life. The bitterness festered. By the time she resurfaced renting a modest house 3 miles from my cabin in the HOA-controlled Pine Valley subdivision, she had rewritten history. She wasn't the criminal who trespassed on federal land. She was the victim of a vindictive veteran out to destroy her. At first, the harassment was subtle. She lodged noise complaints about my woodworking shop, even though the hum of my table saw didn't carry beyond the pines. She reported my truck parked near the boundary, pretending it violated HOA bylaws, even though federal land is none of their jurisdiction. Each complaint came back void, but she was testing the lines, prodding for weakness. When bureaucracy failed her, she turned to the court of public opinion. Neighbors began whispering. At barbecues, I was no longer invited to. Valerie called me a ticking time bomb. She passed out articles on PTSD, suicide rates, and veteran violence, weaving my military service into a narrative of instability. Suddenly, people who had once borrowed my tools were crossing the street to avoid me. Parents kept their kids away. Claire, my wife, a nurse who saw the quiet side of veterans every day, was furious. "She's painting you as a monster because she can't stand the truth," she'd say, slamming shut her laptop after scrolling HOA group chats poisoned with Valerie's rhetoric. It ate at me not because I feared losing friends, but because I could see the toll it took on Claire. Every sideways glance at the grocery store, every cold shoulder from neighbors she once considered friends, it was as if Valerie had wrapped a choke chain around our lives. Then came the day the so-called EPA inspector arrived. Clipboard khakis fake badge. He claimed my wood stains were contaminating groundwater. Except I use water-based finishes precisely because I live on federal land. He knew details about my workshop that only someone who had been watching me could know. When I pressed for credentials, his confidence cracked. That's when Ethan Cole, my old military police buddy, appeared out of nowhere. He dismantled the guy's act in seconds, pointed out the errors on the badge, the wrong vehicle ID, the phony authority. Relief washed over me. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I had someone truly on my side. Ethan had gone on to work with federal agencies as a liaison. He carried the weight of the FBI in his posture, the tone in his voice. When he told me the impersonator's stunt was a felony, I believed him. He framed it as the beginning of something larger, an organized campaign against me. It wasn't just Valerie's obsession, it was money, power, and maybe even bigger forces interested in my claim. That night, Claire begged me to let Ethan help. He knows how to navigate this. You don't have to carry it alone, she whispered, her hand warm over mine at the dinner table. I wanted to believe it. And for a while, I did. Weeks passed, and Ethan inserted himself deeper. He proposed a plan coordinate with the FBI to host an anti-impersonation training exercise on my property. Turn the tables, he said. Show the community the federal government doesn't just tolerate you, it trusts you. It sounded brilliant. It wasn't about denying Valerie's lies anymore. It was about proving them false in front of everyone. Claire loved the idea. I hesitated, but finally agreed. And that was the beginning of my downfall. Looking back, I can see the seams of the trap. Ethan knew too much, anticipated Valerie's next moves with eerie precision. At the time, I chalked it up to federal resources, to the idea that my old buddy had connections I didn't understand. I mistook foresight for protection when it was really orchestration. But hindsight is cruel like that. It makes betrayal look obvious. The days leading up to the exercise were filled with logistical chatter. Ethan walked me through scenarios, coached me on how to act when fake officers appeared. Don't engage, just play along, he insisted. We'll swoop in, demonstrate the right protocols, and the neighborhood will see you're not the problem, you're the solution. I almost felt hopeful. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I'd be vindicated. Claire hung on to that hope too, clinging to Ethan's promises like lifelines. And why wouldn't we? After all, he'd already saved me from one fake inspector. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that Ethan wasn't saving me. He was rehearsing me, grooming me, setting me up for the grand finale where I'd become the villain of my own story. And the HOA president who started this war, Valerie Grant, she was waiting patiently, knowing her revenge would come not from bylaws or petitions, but from betrayal delivered by the one man I thought I could trust. I should have remembered my grandfather's words. Federal law beats local politics every time. What he didn't warn me about was what happens when corruption crawls inside the federal circle itself. That's where law turns into theater, and where men like me become the main act without ever auditioning. He, morning after Ethan, first suggested the FBI training exercise. I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee, staring at the mountains as dawn cut fire across the sky. Usually the sunrise steadied me, a reminder that no matter the chaos of man, the earth endured. But that day, the light felt thin, like it couldn't quite pierce the shadows of what Valerie Grant had been sowing. I kept replaying her voice in my mind, sharp rehearsed venom, disguised as community concern. He's unstable. He's a danger to families. His woodworking is just a cover. Lies like that repeated enough became their own kind of law. Claire joined me on the porch, still in her scrubs from her overnight shift. Her face carried that weary resolve nurses wear after watching too much suffering but still showing up anyway. She set her hand on mine. We can't let her win. If Ethan's plan makes the truth visible, then maybe it's worth the risk. Her words carried more weight than she realized. Claire had always been my anchor, the one who believed in the quiet strength of law and fairness. If even she was leaning into Ethan's plan, then maybe I had to follow. The harassment was no longer a nuisance, it was war by whispers. Neighbors I had once shared beers with on summer evenings now avoided eye contact. One man, Jim Henderson, who had borrowed my snowblower every winter for years, crossed the street when he saw me muttering an excuse about keeping the peace. I didn't blame them. Valerie had armed herself with statistics and selective truths. She waved around articles about veterans with PTSD, about rural standoffs gone bloody, and she painted me into those headlines. She weaponized fear, and fear spread faster than truth. 2 days later, I got a call from another neighbor, one of the few still friendly, an older man named Arthur, retired postal worker who had lived in Pine Valley long before Valerie arrived. His voice was gravelly but urgent. "Son, you need to know she's holding meetings in living rooms now, telling folks you're stockpiling weapons, that you've got a bunker in those hills." I laughed bitterly at the thought, but Arthur didn't laugh with me. "She's good at this. She makes it sound like fact. People believe her, and scared people do stupid things." That was when the line between nuisance and danger finally blurred. It wasn't just about HOA fines or nasty gossip anymore. It was about someone laying a foundation to justify action against me. And once that foundation hardened, it would only take one spark for someone to kick in my door under the banner of community safety. Ethan knew this too. When I told him about Arthur's warning, he nodded, his face grave. That's why the training exercise matters. You can't fight rumors with words. You fight them with evidence, with federal badges and real authority. His confidence was magnetic, the kind that made you want to believe everything was under control. I wanted to believe, maybe too much. The preparations began almost immediately. Ethan introduced me to Agent Laura Stein, the FBI officer who would oversee the operation. She was professional, sharp-eyed, and direct. "Your property is ideal," she said, surveying my cabin and the surrounding pines. "It's close enough to the community for visibility, but isolated enough for controlled scenarios." Hearing a real agent describe my land as an asset gave me a flicker of pride. Maybe finally Valerie's narrative would collapse under the weight of reality. But as days passed, small cracks began to show. Ethan seemed to know exactly what Valerie was planning next, down to the timing of her so-called safety meetings. He shrugged it off when I asked, claiming informants, casual surveillance, federal channels. But a voice in the back of my mind whispered that it was too precise, too convenient. Still, I ignored the whisper. I needed allies, not doubts. Claire didn't ignore it. One evening while we prepared dinner, she pressed me. "How does Ethan know so much? Doesn't it bother you that he's always one step ahead?" I shook my head, though. Unease prickled in my gut. "He's FBI," I said. "That's what they do." But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't convincing either of us. Meanwhile, Valerie escalated. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, warning about a dangerous veteran at the edge of our community. A mother in Pine Valley called the sheriff after her child wandered too close to my boundary line, claiming I had shouted threats, which was absurd. Deputies visited, checked my paperwork, and left apologetically, knowing they had no jurisdiction. Valerie had lost every legal battle, but she was winning the social one. And yet I stayed. I couldn't abandon my grandfather's land, not after all he'd built to protect it. Federal law wasn't just ink on paper. I remember the morning the so-called inspector arrived as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The sun was hanging low over the pines, turning the needles into shards of gold. I had been sanding a walnut cabinet in my workshop, the kind of piece that takes weeks to perfect, when I heard tires crunching on gravel. A white SUV rolled up clean, but unmarked, its antennae too long, its presence too intentional. Out stepped a man in khakis, polished boots, and a jacket with an embroidered patch that looked official from 10 feet away. Clipboard in hand, calm in demeanor, he looked every bit the federal employee he was pretending to be. He introduced himself as an Environmental Protection Agency inspector sent in response to reports of hazardous chemical use. The words slid out smoothly, but I felt the burr under them. Hazardous chemicals. I'd been working wood for 15 years and used nothing more dangerous than water-based stains. My shop was meticulous, my disposal methods by the book. He might as well have accused me of dumping radioactive waste into the creek. I asked for clarification, and that's when things began to tilt sideways. He rattled off details that weren't public knowledge, where I stored my supplies, the brand names of finishes I preferred, even the model of my dust collection system. No casual neighbor could know that. Someone had been watching me, documenting, feeding him lines. Training from my military police years started to hum in my chest. I asked for his federal ID casually at first. His hand hesitated before reaching into his jacket. The badge he produced was convincing, but not perfect. The seal's microprint was slightly blurred, and the formatting didn't match the ones I'd seen countless times. My pulse slowed. He wasn't real. Before I could confront him fully, another vehicle pulled into the drive, a black SUV, tinted windows, deliberate stop. My nerves tightened, but then the driver's door swung open, and I recognized the stride immediately. Ethan Cole. My old military police partner, the man I'd pulled from an overturned Humvee in Iraq, the man who'd stood beside me at my wedding. He hadn't changed much, still broad-shouldered, still carrying himself like a soldier who could snap into action at any second. Ethan walked straight up to the inspector, asked for credentials, and within 30 seconds dismantled the facade. He pointed out the errors on the badge, the missing vehicle tags, the nervous stammer in the man's voice. The imposter tried to bluff, then folded, retreating to his SUV and peeling down the mountain road. I should have felt triumph. Instead, all I felt was a hollow unease. "Who sent him?" I asked, turning to Ethan. "Could be Valerie." "Could be someone bigger," he replied, scanning the tree line like the enemy might still be hiding there. "But what you need to understand is, this wasn't some amateur stunt. Someone's organized, and they want you rattled." The words struck hard. Up until that point, I'd treated Valerie's campaign as neighborhood harassment, a venomous woman's attempt to ruin me through rumor. But an impersonator with detailed intel, that was escalation into felony territory. Claire came home that evening, and when I told her, she looked pale but fierce. "This isn't harassment anymore," she said. "It's criminal. And if Ethan is right, we're not just fighting her, we're fighting whoever she's paying." Over the next week, Ethan became a fixture at the cabin. He brought paperwork, photographs, even examples of fake federal IDs to show me how deep the impersonation game could run. He talked about organized groups operating across state lines, targeting landowners with federal protections, convincing them to fold under pressure. It sounded like a thriller novel, but the look in his eyes told me he believed every word. Then he dropped the plan. "We can flip this on her," he said, leaning across my workshop table, his voice low. "I can arrange an FBI anti-impersonation exercise right here. Real agents, real protocols. The community will see federal law on your side, and it'll crush Valerie's narrative." It was bold, risky. But the thought of neighbors watching real FBI agents train on my property, acknowledging me as legitimate, felt like the perfect counterstrike. Claire nodded eagerly. "It's the only way to show the truth," she said. And I wanted so badly for the truth to win that I silenced the unease gnawing at me. Still, little things unsettled me. Ethan always seemed to know Valerie's schedule when she hosted her safety meetings, what rumors she'd spread next. When I pressed him, he gave vague answers about informants and channels. My gut whispered betrayal, but my heart clung to the idea that my old brother-in-arms wouldn't turn on me. Meanwhile, Valerie doubled down. She wasn't satisfied with smearing my name. She wanted me isolated. One evening, Arthur, the retired postman who still spoke to me, dropped by with grim news. "She's got folks thinking you're armed to the teeth, hiding arsenals in your basement. She's passing out charts about veteran suicide rates, saying you're volatile. I've never seen fear spread this fast." I clenched my fists. She wasn't just attacking me, she was attacking every veteran who ever carried scars home from service. Claire wrapped her arm through mine, her eyes burning. "She's exploiting prejudice, and she knows it. That's what makes her dangerous." So I told Ethan yes. I agreed to his plan. He arranged the logistics quickly, almost too quickly. Agent Laura Stein came to the cabin professional and composed confirming that the FBI would stage exercises on my property within weeks. She walked the perimeter, checked the clearings, and even praised the setup as ideal. Ethan stood beside her like a man proud of his work, but every time he smiled, a shadow tugged at my instincts. I wanted to trust. I needed to trust. Because by then, Valerie's lies had convinced half of Pine Valley that I was a threat, and if I didn't clear my name, the next knock on my door might not be an imposter, it might be deputies with a real warrant crafted from her poison. That night, Claire and I sat by the fire, the crackle of logs filling the silence. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, though doubt pressed like stone on my chest. "It's the only way. We let the feds show the truth." She squeezed my hand. "Then we stand together." I kissed her forehead, but as she drifted to sleep against my shoulder, I stared into the flames and wondered if I'd just handed our lives to the wrong man. The first time I truly understood how deep Valerie's psychological warfare had sunk into the community was at the Pine Valley playground. Claire and I had gone there on a Saturday afternoon, thinking some fresh air might ease the tension. Families clustered near the swings and picnic benches, kids racing around with popsicles in hand. But when we arrived, conversations stuttered. Heads turned. Parents pulled their children closer. A few even left outright hustling kids into SUVs with nervous glances cast back over their shoulders. Claire's jaw tightened. She was used to whispers in hospital corridors, to the silent judgment that follows a nurse who advocates too fiercely for her patients. But this was different. This was our neighbors treating us like a contagion. She tugged my arm. "We're leaving," she said. I wanted to argue, but the truth was plain. Valerie had already poisoned the well. Later that evening, I got a call from Arthur, the retired postman who'd always been fair with me. "Son," he said, voice heavy, "Valerie's holding meetings. Not HOA board stuff. Private gatherings in living rooms. She calls them community safety sessions. She's showing folks articles about unstable vets, mass shootings, PTSD. Says you're building an arsenal in your cabin." I tried to speak up, but the fear she's planting it spreads like wildfire. Hearing it laid bare like that chilled me more than the imposter inspector ever had. Lies in official letters could be swatted down with proof. But lies told over coffee and cookies in someone's living room, those embedded themselves in people's hearts. They made parents hesitate, made neighbors glance at you sideways. They rewrote who you were in the eyes of your own community. Claire was furious. "She's exploiting every ugly stereotype I've seen destroy veterans' lives," she said, pacing the living room. "Using trauma as a weapon against you, against us. This isn't just harassment anymore, it's defamation. It's calculated character assassination." I tried to calm her, but she wasn't wrong. Valerie wasn't just fighting me in the open, she was reshaping reality behind closed doors. The danger wasn't just legal, it was social, psychological, and potentially lethal if someone took her narrative seriously enough to act. That night, Ethan came by again. He carried himself like a soldier stepping into a war zone, scanning our property before even knocking. Over dinner, Claire confronted him directly. If what Sean heard is true, then Valerie is planting seeds that could get him killed. What do we do about that? Ethan's eyes hardened. We expose her lies with action. Words won't do it. You can't argue away fear once it's rooted. That's why we need the training exercise. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Imagine this. Your neighbors watch FBI agents run drills on your property. They see you cooperating, standing shoulder to shoulder with federal authority. That image will destroy her story. No rumor can survive it. Claire's eyes lit with cautious hope, but I still felt the unease gnawing. Ethan's confidence was too complete, too rehearsed. Every time I asked how he knew Valerie's next move, he brushed it off with a vague "I have sources." But sources don't predict timing down to the day. Sources don't give you blueprints of your enemy's rhetoric. Still, I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted to believe the nightmare could end. So I agreed. In the days that followed, Valerie's campaign grew even more elaborate. Flyers showed up in mailboxes, warning of a dangerous veteran with access to weapons. Some included my name. Claire found one stuffed under our truck's windshield wiper at the grocery store. The sheriff's office fielded calls from worried parents demanding protection. Deputies came out again, apologetic as always, reminding me that my land was federally protected outside their jurisdiction. Their hands were tied. But Valerie wasn't just leaning on fear. She was weaving legality into her story. At one safety meeting, she held up county records, twisting them to make it look like I was skirting environmental codes. At another, she claimed she'd petitioned the state to investigate me for suspicious activities. It was all smoke, but smoke blinds you before it chokes you. Claire fought back in her own way. She gathered testimonies from hospital colleagues, other veterans she'd treated who knew me. She talked about setting up a website, a digital wall. When I look back now, I realize that everything leading up to the so-called training exercise was like walking through a carefully constructed maze. Every turn I took, every choice I made, led me deeper into a trap I couldn't see. But at the time, I thought I was finally seizing control. The pressure from Valerie Grant had reached a fever pitch by early fall. Flyers with my name scrawled across them in bold letters circulated through Pine Valley, accusing me of being a dangerous veteran hiding weapons. Neighbors who once shared cookouts with me now avoided even making eye contact. One father who used to bring his son to my shop to learn about woodworking crossed the street when he saw me in town. He whispered to his boy too loudly for me not to hear, "Don't look at him, just keep walking." Claire, my wife, saw the toll it took on me, though I tried to mask it. She confronted me one evening, holding one of the pamphlets Valerie had slipped under our truck's wiper blade at the grocery store. The cover showed a stock image of a brooding soldier shadow obscuring his eyes. The words screamed, "Veteran unstable, know the warning signs." Inside it listed behaviors that mirrored my life, working with tools late at night, living in isolation, distrusting authority. It was me twisted into a villain. Claire's hands trembled as she held it. "She's not just spreading rumors anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "She's crafting a psychological profile. She's teaching people to fear you." That night, I sat on the porch, long after Claire had gone to bed. The pines creaked in the wind, and the stars shone down like indifferent witnesses. I thought about my grandfather, the man who had fought to secure this land and protect it with federal law. What would he have done? Would he have stayed silent while lies consumed his reputation? Or would he have fought back using every tool available? The answer seemed obvious. So when Ethan Cole arrived the next morning with his black SUV and his calm, commanding presence, I was ready to hear his plan. He carried a folder stuffed with documents, training protocols, and what looked like draft operation orders. "The FBI is already running anti-impersonation exercises across the state," he said, spreading the papers across my kitchen table. "I can get them to stage 1 here. Think about it. Your neighbors will watch federal agents run drills on your property. They'll see with their own eyes that you're not a threat, you're an ally." I hesitated. "Why here? Why not at one of their facilities?" "Because here it's real," Ethan replied without missing a beat. "Your property straddles the edge of HOA territory. It's perfect for demonstrating jurisdiction. And besides, the community needs to witness it. Watching on television won't change their minds. But seeing you side by side with federal agents, that kills Valerie's lies dead." His certainty was magnetic. Claire, listening from across the room, practically glowed with hope. "This could fix everything," she said. "Finally, they'll have to see who you really are." I wanted to believe it. God help me, I did. The days leading up to the exercise were a blur of preparation. Ethan visited daily, pacing the property like a commander surveying a battlefield. He pointed out where agents would take cover, how imposters might approach, which signals I should watch for. If they come to the door with fake warrants, don't resist. Play along. Ask for ID. Stall. The agents will intervene. His words drilled into me until I found myself rehearsing scenarios in my head late at night. Agent Laura Stein, the FBI officer assigned to oversee the drill, came by twice. She was everything Ethan wasn't measured, cautious, unwilling to overpromise. She asked questions instead of making declarations. Where do you keep your tools? Do neighbors have clear sightlines to your property from the road? Has anyone attempted to enter without permission? Her professionalism steadied me. For a while, I let myself believe this was legitimate, but there were cracks even then. Once when Laura asked Ethan where he had obtained detailed intelligence on Valerie's private safety sessions, he brushed her off with a vague federal channels. I saw her frown ever so slightly before moving on. Another time, I caught Ethan studying Claire when she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. When I pressed him later, asking if something was wrong, he only smiled. "You've got a good woman, Sean. She's tougher than most soldiers I've known." I didn't know whether to take it as praise or warning. Meanwhile, Valerie wasn't slowing down. Arthur, the retired postman, showed up one evening carrying another stack of her propaganda. "She's telling folks you're stockpiling weapons, son," he said gravely, "that you've got connections in the black market. Half the town believes her. They're scared." His voice dropped lower. "And scared people make rash decisions." I clenched my fists until my knuckles went white. "She wants them primed, so that when something happens, when imposters show up, they won't question it. They'll think it's justice." Claire put a hand on my arm, her face pale but resolute. "Then we prove her wrong. We make them see the truth. If this exercise can do that, we don't have a choice." That night I stood by the fire, the flames painting the log walls in flickering orange. I thought of my grandfather's words: "Federal law beats local politics every time." But what he hadn't warned me about was betrayal from within, when the very people who wore the badge of federal power twisted it into a weapon. I told myself Ethan was still my brother in arms, the man I had trusted with my life. I told myself Agent Stein's presence guaranteed this was real. I told myself Claire needed hope, and I couldn't take that away. So I agreed. I agreed to the plan that would bring the FBI onto my land, that would turn my home into a stage, that would place my life into hands I no longer fully trusted. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep that night, a thought gnawed at me like a rat in the walls. What if this wasn't about protecting me at all? What if I was the demonstration? The morning of the exercise felt wrong from the start. The air was colder than usual, a sharp wind rattling the pine branches, as though nature itself was trying to warn me. Claire handed me a mug of coffee, but even her smile looked brittle, painted on for my sake. "This is it," she whispered. "By tonight they'll know the truth." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. I'd rehearsed Ethan's instructions so many times that the words echoed like a drill sergeant's cadence in my head. Don't resist, don't escalate, stall but comply. Still, something about the way Ethan had pushed this plan forward so quickly gnawed at me. He wasn't just confident, he was certain. Too certain. By 7 a.m., my property was crawling with black SUVs and agents in dark jackets. Some wore visible FBI insignia, others blended into plain clothes. They moved with practiced precision-checking radios, scanning sightlines, positioning themselves like pieces on a chessboard. Agent Laura Stein was all business, her tone clipped and professional as she gave me final reminders. "Mr. Matthews, your role is simple. Go about your day. If imposters approach, don't engage directly. Signal if possible, but otherwise comply. We'll handle the intervention." Her professionalism steadied me, but only slightly. I glanced toward Ethan, who stood near the porch with arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "It's all under control," he said, his voice too calm, too rehearsed. The first hours passed quietly. I worked in my shop, sawing planks, pretending to focus while agents ghosted through the tree line. Claire moved between the cabin and garden, her face pale but determined. Every so often I caught her eyes flicking toward the road as though waiting for the storm she sensed was coming. And then it came. Around 2 in the afternoon, 3 men appeared at the edge of the drive. They were dressed in full police uniforms, pressed and cleaned their boots, striking gravel with synchronized precision. Their faces were hard, their voices steady. One held a paper folded into thirds, another adjusted handcuffs on his belt. Mr. Matthews, the leader, announced, his tone commanding, "We have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include federal environmental violations and illegal weapons possession. You'll need to come with us." For 30 long seconds my heart nearly stopped. Their uniforms were immaculate, their warrant crisp and official-looking. For one awful moment, I wondered if Valerie had somehow succeeded, if the government had actually turned against me. But then training kicked in. The Miranda warning wasn't recited properly. The badge number had the wrong format. Subtle mistakes, but clear to anyone who had worked federal law. My pulse steadied. These were the imposters Ethan had warned me about. I played my role. May I see your credentials more closely? I asked voice, calm buying time. They handed me IDs that at a glance looked authentic, but up close the fonts were slightly wrong, the seals just a shade off. My confidence grew. Any second now, Stein's team would step out from the tree line, expose the fraud, and vindicate me. I glanced around waiting for the signal, but the signal never came. Instead, armed agents poured into the clearing with rifles raised not at the imposters but at me. Their voices thundered in unison. Hands on your head, get on the ground. My mind spun. What the hell are you doing? They're the fakes. I'm the target here, but my words fell into the chaos. Claire screamed from the cabin doorway, her voice breaking as she watched me shoved to the dirt gravel grinding into my cheek. Cold cuffs snapped onto my wrists. Even the imposters looked stunned. One shouted, "We're actors. We were hired for this exercise. We thought this was sanctioned." Their voices wavered, fear raw and unfeigned. But no one seemed to care. "Ethan," I shouted, twisting my head toward the porch. Tell them, this is the drill you set up. He didn't move." He stood beside Agent Stein, calm as ever, arms folded, eyes locked on me with an unreadable expression. Then he lifted his radio to his mouth and spoke words that froze my blood. Phase 1 complete. Target is down and contained. Are you ready for Phase 2? The world seemed to tilt. Phase 1. Target. Contained. Those weren't the words of a man protecting me. Those were the words of a handler, a conspirator, someone orchestrating an operation. The imposters panicked, shouting over one another, swearing they'd been contracted legitimately. Stein barked orders trying to sort truth from chaos, but her agents kept their rifles trained on me as though I were the criminal. Claire sobbed from the doorway, her voice breaking as she begged them to stop. And Ethan, my brother in arms, my best man, the man who had once dragged me bleeding out of an alley in Iraq, just watched. Calm, cold, detached. In that moment, terror hollowed me out. Not terror of being arrested or shot, but the terror of betrayal so complete it rewrites your entire past. Every moment of trust, every secret shared, every story told by the fire suddenly poisoned. This wasn't Valerie's endgame alone. She had help. And the worst part, that help had worn my trust like a disguise until it no longer needed to. Lying face down in the dirt, hands-cuffed rifles pointed at my back, one thought pounded in my skull. I was never the subject of this exercise. I was the exercise. For a few seconds after Ethan's chilling words, Phase 1 complete. Target is down, and contained, the world around me seemed to blur. The shouts of the imposters, the commands of the agents, even Claire's desperate cries all became a muffled roar in my ears. I stared at Ethan, my face half buried in gravel, and tried to reconcile the man in front of me with the brother I'd once trusted with my life. He had been my shield in combat, my best man at my wedding, the godfather to my daughter. And now, here he was, delivering me like cargo into someone else's hands. But then something unexpected cut through the chaos. Claire's voice sharp and furious. She came running from the cabin, clutching a large cardboard box that she dropped in the dirt beside me with a thud. "You're arresting the wrong man," she screamed. "The traitor is standing right there." She pointed directly at Ethan, her eyes blazing. Agent Laura Stein snapped her head toward Claire. "Ma'am, step back. This is an active federal operation." But Claire didn't back down. Her hands trembled as she ripped open the box and spilled its contents across the ground. Manila folders, bank statements, printed photographs, even a handful of audio tapes. Papers scattered like leaves in the wind, but each one carried weight heavier than stone. "Look at it," she demanded. "Transfers into Torres Consulting, 50,000 here, 75,000 there. All from Valerie Grant's shell accounts. Pictures of Ethan meeting her in Denver. Audio recordings of his phone calls planning this entire setup. He sold out my husband for money." Gasps rippled through the line of agents. Even the imposter officers stopped shouting and stared. I twisted my head enough to glimpse the documents. My stomach dropped as I saw Ethan's name tied to bank deposits, his signature on receipts, photographs of him shaking Valerie's hand at a high-end restaurant. Agent Stein barked at one of her team, "Secure that evidence." Now, 2 agents scrambled to gather the papers while Stein herself crouched over the bank statements, her eyes narrowing. Ethan's composure cracked. His voice, usually steady, carried a thin edge of desperation. "Laura, this isn't what it looks like. Valerie fabricated these records. She's framing me." But Claire wasn't finished. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and pressed play. Ethan's voice spilled into the clearing, unmistakable, recorded in his deep timbre. "Matthews has PTSD triggers related to authority figures. If you send men in police uniforms, he'll freeze. He might react defensively. That gives you the leverage to justify force. It'll make him look guilty in front of witnesses. Every word landed like a hammer. The man who had once guided me through nightmares was weaponizing my vulnerabilities against me. Agent Stein stood slowly, her face unreadable, but her hand moved to her holster. "Agent Torres," she said, her voice like ice, "you are under arrest for federal employee, corruption, conspiracy, and violation of security protocols. Put your hands on your head." Ethan's mask finally shattered. He looked at me, still cuffed, dirt smeared across my face with something almost like regret. Then his expression hardened, and he raised his hands slowly. "You don't understand," he said, directing his words at me more than anyone else. "It wasn't personal. I had debts. Valerie gave me a way out. Better me surviving than both of us going down." They moved in on him, cuffing his wrists. Claire dropped to her knees beside me, tears streaking her cheeks. "I couldn't tell you," she whispered fiercely. "Not until I had proof. I knew if I confronted him too soon, he'd bury us both. So I gathered everything. Every late-night call, every suspicious bank record. I followed the trail until I could drop it in front of the FBI themselves." I stared at her, shock colliding with relief. For weeks I'd felt alone, boxed in by Valerie's lies and Ethan's manipulations, but Claire had been fighting her own battle in the shadows, and she had just turned the tide. Agent Stein's voice cut through the moment. "Release Mr. Matthews. Get him out of those cuffs." The pressure around my wrists eased as an agent unlocked the restraints. I pushed myself upright, my arms shaking, rage and betrayal coursing through me. The imposter officers, still wide-eyed, began waving their contracts. "We thought this was real training. We were hired by a company called Legal Consulting Services. They told us Agent Torres was coordinating it." Their panic sounded genuine, and Stein ordered her team to secure their paperwork too. As they hauled Ethan toward a waiting SUV, he twisted his head back toward me. His eyes were hard, his jaw clenched. "You still don't know the whole story, Sean," he said. "Valerie wasn't the only one pulling strings. There are bigger players. You were just convenient." The words burrowed into me like shards of glass. Bigger players, convenient target. My entire fight with Valerie suddenly felt like just one layer of a deeper game. Claire grabbed my hand, squeezing tight. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to poison you one last time." But I couldn't help it. Even as Ethan disappeared into federal custody, even as Valerie's house was no doubt being raided, I felt the ground shift beneath me. What if this wasn't the end? What if the war had only just revealed its true size? Still, one thing was certain: my wife had saved me with her courage, her persistence, her refusal to bow to fear. The neighbor who had tried to brand me unstable, the brother who betrayed me for money, they hadn't counted on Claire. As the agents loaded boxes of evidence into their vehicles, Agent Stein walked over and looked me square in the eye. "Mr. Matthews, you've been the target of one of the most elaborate frauds I've ever seen, but thanks to your wife's evidence, we're shutting it down." For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest ease. Justice wasn't fully delivered yet, but it was in motion, and Valerie Grant's empire of lies was about to collapse. The hours after Ethan's arrest unfolded like a fever dream. Federal agents swarmed Valerie Grant's rental house in Pine Valley at dawn the next morning. Neighbors lined the sidewalks in their pajamas, clutching coffee mugs as if they were talismans, watching their HOA queen escorted into a black SUV with cuffs biting her wrists. She didn't scream, didn't resist. She just smiled, lips pressed thin, as though she had known this ending all along, and still thought herself victorious. But for me, the aftermath was messier. Agent Laura Stein personally briefed Claire and me inside the cabin. Boxes of evidence lined our floor bank records, tying Ethan to Valerie transcripts of their encrypted messages, contracts with the fake officers. "Miss Matthews," she said, "this isn't just a neighborhood feud. This is part of a criminal enterprise operating across multiple states. Legal Consulting Services isn't a real firm, it's a front. They've targeted landowners with federal protections before. You weren't their first. And you won't be their last." Her words chilled me. I had always thought Valerie was obsessed, unhinged, acting out of spite. But now I saw her as a cog in something larger, a machine designed to strip people of land by weaponizing fear, rumor, and corruption. And Ethan, the man I had once trusted above all others, had sold me into that machine for a payout that wouldn't even cover a decade of my family's mortgage. Neighbors began trickling toward the cabin in the days that followed. Some came with casseroles as if food could mend betrayal. Others came with sheepish apologies, unable to meet my eyes. "We didn't know," one mother said, wringing her hands. She made it sound so real. "We thought we were protecting our kids." I wanted to rage at them, to ask why no one had asked me directly, why they had chosen gossip over truth. But I held my tongue. Maybe I was too tired, or maybe I knew anger wouldn't rebuild what had been broken. Claire handled them better. She greeted each visitor firmly but with grace, her spine straight, her voice calm. "We don't blame you for being afraid," she told one father, "but fear isn't an excuse for silence. Next time, speak to the person you're afraid of. Don't let someone else write their story for them." Watching her, I realized she wasn't just my wife, she was my shield, sharper and braver than any comrade I'd had in uniform. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Valerie's meticulous record-keeping, once her pride as a lawyer, became her downfall. She had documented payments, timelines, even scripts for the fake officers. Prosecutors called it a criminal playbook. Ethan confronted with Claire's recordings, and the government's investigation into his accounts pled guilty to corruption and conspiracy. I watched his sentencing via live feed, my jaw tight. 10 years in federal prison. The judge's words burned in my ears. "You betrayed every oath you swore, every brother who trusted you, every citizen who believed your badge meant something." Ethan never looked at the camera. Valerie fared no better. 8 years for conspiracy, fraud, and harassment on federal land. When the verdict was read, she finally lost her smile. I thought I would feel triumph, but all I felt was emptiness. Still, justice brought consequences I hadn't expected. The federal government issued a permanent protection order over my mining claim, designating it a sensitive site due to the harassment campaign. It meant any future interference by local authorities or by HOA busybodies would be treated as a federal offense. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight of law truly on my side. Compensation followed, too. The Victims Fund granted us money that covered repairs, legal fees, and expansion of my woodworking business. Claire urged me to set aside part of it to create a fund for other veterans harassed on federal lands. "No one should go through this alone," she said. And she was right. But the most unexpected outcome was what happened in Pine Valley itself. The HOA board, once Valerie's kingdom, was dismantled and rebuilt under federal oversight. At the first community meeting after her arrest, neighbors voted to limit the board's powers, stripping it of its iron grip. Arthur, the retired postman, was elected president, and his first act was to issue me a public apology in front of the entire neighborhood. "We let fear blind us," he said. "It won't happen again." I wanted to believe him. Maybe in time I will. Yet even with justice served, scars remain. At night, when the wind rattles the cabin shutters, I sometimes hear Ethan's voice again. Phase 1 complete. Target is down and contained. Betrayal doesn't just vanish with prison bars. It lingers an echo in the bones. Claire helps silence those echoes. We sit together on the porch, her hand always finding mine, her presence reminding me that not everyone I trusted turned against me. She saved me not just with her evidence, but with her refusal to surrender to fear. And maybe that's the lesson carved into all of this. Laws can protect land, but only courage protects truth. HOAs, corrupt lawyers, even old friends with badges, they can twist reality until neighbors turn into enemies. But the truth has a way of clawing its way back, carried by those who refuse to bow to lies. If you're watching this and you've ever felt isolated, slandered, or cornered by people who thought they had power over you, remember, fear only wins when you stay silent. Speak, fight, stand your ground, because sometimes the only way to survive the storm is to remind the world that you're still standing when it passes. In the end, this story isn't just about an HOA president drunk on power or a friend who traded loyalty for money. It's about how fragile trust can be and how powerful resilience becomes when everything else is stripped away. I learned that laws and property rights are important, but they're only as strong as the people who stand behind them. What saved me wasn't a badge or even a federal statute. It was truth, persistence, and the courage of someone who refused to let lies define us. Life will always bring betrayal rumors, or people who thrive on tearing others down. But if you hold firm, if you cling to integrity, even when the world doubts you, the truth has a way of breaking through. So to everyone listening, never underestimate your own strength or the power of those who truly stand beside you. And if this story resonates, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, because every voice matters in keeping truth alive.